The Cellar.
At the time of this story, I worked in a warehouse that my father had just recently purchased. He bought it for 25% of its cost from a farmer who seemed very excited to be rid of it. It was located in the middle of Mennonite country, with no neighbors for a half-mile around. If you look out the window, you see cornfields and scraggly trees. Cell service? Forget about it. At the time, I was working there alone, painting and preparing the front office portion for eventual functionality. To get to the front office, you must go through a hallway from the main warehouse into a secondary office and then go through another door into the front. I would frequently hear bumps and thuds and occasionally would go into the warehouse and feel air movement, but I've always attributed it to drafts and animal life within the roof. The only thing that has ever made me uneasy about the building is the fact that all of the door locks are reversed. It seems like whoever installed these locks didn't intend to keep people out. They intended to keep something in. I was in the front office one night when I began to hear the thudding. I ignored it and continued to apply masking tape to the door I was working on. But this time, it was accompanied by a screeching sound. Not loud, just audible. I was freaked out, but convinced myself that it was just a pissed-off raccoon or squirrel that had found its way inside. So I continued working until I heard the slam. The door to the secondary office had been open. It sounded like it had violently slammed shut. I then peeked around the corner and saw that I was right. The secondary door was now closed. I tried to form some logic in my head that maybe a strong draft had sucked the door closed, although I knew there was no such draft. The thudding then began again, but it was closer this time. I've never been able to put a proximity on it, but it did sound like it was right on the other side of the door. I froze, unsure of what was happening. My eyes then locked on the door handle, which began to turn. The door disengaged its latch and slowly swung open. Wider, wider. Nothing was there. Nothing visible. No air movement. Just quiet. So quiet. A quiet that seemed to overwhelm me with its presence. A quiet that was so thick I couldn't breathe. Then the quiet was shattered when the screech came again. This time, it was clearly human, pained, angered, and emanating from the main warehouse. The door then slammed. That entirely broke my frozen, fearful state, and I ran. I ran straight out to my car and drove until I was in cell range to call my father. When I did get through to him, he didn't believe me or anything about the doors closing, but he did agree that the building had something weird about it. He told me that he would be right up. So, fast forward about a half an hour, my dad and I met up and drove all the way back to the warehouse. I showed him the door that had slammed shut, showing him that it was separated from both the front office and the main warehouse, so no draft could have closed it. I then told him about the thuds, the screeching, and the sudden quiet that had overcome the building. He then decided that we should check the main warehouse. Emboldened by his presence, I led the way. Something that you should know about this warehouse: it was formerly a furniture manufacturing place owned by a Mennonite farmer. They made handmade chairs, tables, etc. Because of all the cutting that went on within the warehouse, the floor was thickly coated with dust. We walked into the warehouse, and we saw nothing out of the ordinary. The dust looked like it was completely untouched. The doors were closed, windows were locked. The only thing that we found out of place was one of the hanging fluorescent light fixtures. It was hanging askew and swaying slightly. Insisting we take a look at the mount to ensure it didn't just break loose, my dad went and grabbed a stepladder. He supported the ladder while I climbed up and grabbed the swinging light. I looked up on top of the light and saw a handprint. A single, fresh, inhumanely large handprint. No footprints were in the dust around the light. No signs of any other presence. I climbed down and switched places with my father. He saw it and said, "What the hell? There's been no one in here for years." He climbed down and told me he'd been suspicious of someone breaking in and stealing parts from the warehouse's light system. He couldn't believe me that this wasn't human, that something wasn't right there. The last thing he said was, "Nothing is here. Next time, just go back to work." And then, as if to show its presence, the thud returned. This time it wasn't just a thud though, it was more like an earthquake. The entire building felt like it was moving underneath our feet. The heartbeat-like thud was then overlaid by the screech, that awful, awful screech. It felt like it was coming from within the walls themselves. Me and my dad took one look at each other and we ran. We ran, and I've never gone back. My father had to hire someone to finish my job, and he has since moved into the office. I've talked to him about it, and he said that he has heard the thudding, but thus far nothing has happened further. So what actually happened? I don't know. I can't explain it, nor do I ever really care to know. What I do know is that there is something paranormal in that building, and the man who sold it to my father, he knew. I'll never forget the sound of that lock turning by itself, or the feeling of that deafening silence. I had just started subleasing from this apartment. One night, I went to bed, and everything was locked up, including my bedroom door. I woke up around 3 a.m. to this jingling sound. At first, I just laid there, a bit dazed and confused. And then I was like, what the hell is making that sound? I laid there for a while trying to wake up, and I realized that that's my keys. It sounded like someone was playing with my keys in my room. At this point, I was too terrified to do anything, too terrified to even move. Then the overhead light came on. This was the stuff of nightmares, and I'm literally about to wet myself at this point. I was terrified that there was a robber or somebody in my house looking to do harm. Then, as I laid there quietly, all of a sudden, I heard the keys drop and hit the floor. I'm trembling at this point, and too terrified to do anything about it. I just laid there wide awake until sunrise came, unable to look around the room or face my fears of the situation. With sunlight now coming through the window, I finally took a peek over to where I thought the person would be standing, and there was no one there. I got up, I walked over to the spot, and sure enough, there are the keys just lying on the ground. No door had been opened or closed, or else I would have heard it. All my doors and windows were still locked. I couldn't explain it. This is hands down one of the creepiest experiences I've ever had. I literally stayed at a hotel for the next week until I could find a better and new apartment. I wasn't going to stay in that place ever again. First, a bit of background. I grew up a devout Christian in a Pentecostal-type church. This included all the weird stuff like prophecy, speaking in tongues, healing, and such. I'm not sure I ever really believed in any of it. And many years later, I finally had the courage to admit to myself that I was an atheist. But there was one incident that I can't reconcile with either my former Christian beliefs or my current disbelief in the supernatural. About 30 years ago, having recently finished university and still professing to be a Christian, I shared a rental house with two friends. It was a traditional English terraced house with 2 bedrooms upstairs and 2 reception rooms downstairs, with one of them being turned into a 3rd bedroom. On that day, we had gone out with one housemate's parents. We went to a quaint market town with lots of tea rooms and cute gift and antique shops. That was my idea of a perfect day. It was summer, lovely, and sunny. The kind of day where you physically feel the joy of just being alive. In one of the gift shops, I was quite taken with a small framed print which I thought would look perfect in my room. I bought it and put it on my bedroom wall across the other side of the room from my bed. Now, I've never slept well, but that night was a particularly tough one. I felt uneasy as soon as I turned my light off. It was probably around 2 a.m. when I started to hear a scraping noise coming from across the room. It was like somebody was pulling a garden rake across the carpet quite rhythmically and deliberately. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I turned my lamp on and lay there for several minutes trying to work out what it was. Could it be a mouse? No. I could see the spot where the noise was coming from, and there was no way that such a deliberate sound was being made by an animal. Was it happening next door? No, the house had been empty for several months. Was it my housemate in the room next to me? No, she had gone away that night. At this point, I was sitting up in bed feeling more and more uneasy. Eventually, I gained the courage to get out of bed and go look more closely. As I stood up, I felt a strong resistance in front of me, which got stronger with each step I took. I have no idea how long it took me to get across the room. It felt like several minutes, but was probably only seconds. I got to the spot where the noise was coming from. I was looking down at my plain beige carpet. Nothing looked out of the ordinary, but I could clearly hear the rhythmic scraping noise like it was right there. I was bending right over where it was coming from. At this point, my courage failed me, and I ran out of the room to my housemate in the bedroom that was directly below mine. I hammered on her door, desperate for some human company, and to regain a sense of sanity. Eventually there was a faint noise coming from inside the room, so I let myself in. My housemate suddenly bolted upright, looking absolutely terrified. I can't remember the exact words she said, but it was something like this. "Thank goodness you came in. I was lying in bed and I was unable to move. It was like something was pinning my arms." It then started to pull me up and saying in a scratchy voice, "Come upstairs and see what I have for you." She went on to say that she became aware of a dense blackness creeping down the stairs. This entity, for want of a better description, was trying to pull her into it. It was at this point that I had opened her door and she managed to snap out of it. We stayed in her room for a long time, probably a couple hours until it started to get light, not knowing what else to do. Eventually, we gained the courage to both go up into my room. By that time, the scraping sound had stopped. However, we both had this immediate, inexplicable revulsion to the picture that I had bought and hung up from that day. It was on the wall very close to the spot where I had heard the noise earlier. The noise had been coming from about a foot forward of the wall. I raced over to the picture, I snatched it off the wall, I then ran downstairs out of the house and threw it in the trash bin. The next morning we were too shaken to go to work, but we also didn't want to be in the house, so we went for a long walk. When we eventually got back home, there was none of that bad feeling from the night before. However, we asked one of the church elders to come and bless the house for us just in case. We lived there for another 18 months, and I've never experienced anything like it since. Looking back, I can think of explanations for certain aspects of what happened. For example, my housemate was clearly experiencing sleep paralysis. But that doesn't explain why, having never happened before, she had it at the exact time I was struggling to walk across my room upstairs. Nor the fact that she was being coaxed upstairs to where it was happening. It also didn't fit the kind of thing I believe Satan would do at the time. I didn't believe in possessed objects or anything like that. I could put the scraping noise down to a mouse in the floorboards, but I know what I heard while I was standing directly over the sound. It was right there below me, on the carpet. Not in the skirting board, not under the floorboards, and the deliberate rhythm of it too. It still gives me shivers whenever I think about it. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode. Please leave a comment and let me know what you thought about the stories covered in today's video. If you enjoyed this content, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps the channel continue to grow. Also, you can check the description box below and find a link to my merch store, tons of awesome designs, and the proceeds help fund the channel. For those of you that are interested, I have a Cellar Dwellers membership tier for the channel. It's only $2.99 a month. It comes with some pretty cool perks, so if that interests you, then please go check it out. I also have that linked in the description box below. If you'd like to submit a real-life scary story that you would like featured on an episode on the channel, please do so using the email linked in the description box below. As always, I do all the research, writing, recording, and editing for the channel myself, so anything that you do to support the channel is greatly appreciated. Until next time, I will see you all again as we head back into the cellar.